Hello, beautiful friends. I am Laurel Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, welcoming you to this episode of Sleepy Bedtime Blessings, a podcast designed to help you rest, relax, and fall asleep, all while deepening in your connection with your beautiful team of angels who love you so. If we're meeting for the first time, I am an angelic practitioner, a spiritual teacher, and an encourager of souls. And I do this through one-on-one angel sessions, which are just beautiful. The way it works is we meet over the phone. It's a 60-minute session. I say a prayer blessing that invites the angels to join us. And then we have a soul-inspired conversation. We get to focus on whatever is in your heart. I bring forward messages from the angels for you, and my intention is always to hold a beautiful, sacred space for you to connect more deeply with your divine guidance. And so if you ever feel guided to book your own session, you can reach out to me at my website, illuminatingsouls.com. I also offer soul mentoring, which provides for consistent support as you navigate a period of growth or transformation in your life. Typically, a soul mentoring package runs for 12 weeks. Many people stay longer because they find it helpful, and it's a lovely way to receive support on your life path. And I also have a variety of classes. I'm always offering something new. And usually my classes are small and intimate. So there's lots of ways for us to get to know each other and spend time together. So whenever you're awake, you can mosey on over to illuminatingsouls.com. You'll find a space to sign up for my daily inspiration email blast and see what I've got cooking up. But for now, the angels and I are here to help you rest. So I invite you to get comfortable in your body and just take some nice deep breaths in. Did you hear me take that breath? I was like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Let's take a nice deep breath in and just release. So nice to be here with you. You know, I don't know about you, but as I record this, I will say the energy for the past 10 days has been like a roller coaster. It feels like it's been so wobbly. And all I want to do is sit in my living room and watch television. I don't have any extra energy for anything. And I'm always aware that when these passages happen, that it's a cycle, that there's this ebb and flow to the energies of life. And so I thought I would share with you something that I wrote a while back. I think most of you know that I post inspiring messages on Facebook every day. And these are messages I've written over the last 10 years. I have thousands of posters I've created. And it's always interesting to me when a message that I wrote a long time ago resonates so deeply for me in this moment. And so this is the message I'm going to share with you, and maybe it will resonate for you as well. It's a simple message. It says, You are not lost. Your soul's GPS knows exactly where you are and is guiding you forward. You have options. Lift your eyes to the horizon and be willing to see new opportunities on your path. Follow your lightness of spirit. It knows where you are going. Isn't that a sweet message? I posted it the other day and it resonates for me because I feel like I'm going through a mini episode of lostness. And I don't mean that to sound scary. It's not scary lostness. It's more a feeling of being a bit disoriented. Like I'm not sure where I'm going. It's different than how I might feel if I'm navigating the mystery. Like that feels delightful and empowering, and inviting. But the lost energy to me feels a lot like the fog. I live in the Bay Area, and so at different times during the year, it's not unusual for us to get this heavy fog. And so even if you know the milestones that you're familiar with are there, they're not visible. And so it's very disorienting. That's what this energy feels like right now. The lost energy, right? The lostness. And usually for me, it feels like I'm not sure where I'm supposed to be going next. I don't know. I don't know where to apply my energy. I don't know that I feel like doing much. And so over the years, I have learned to trust this space because we co-create multidimensionally. So when I'm in this place of feeling a bit lost, it only means that my waking, conscious personality self is feeling unplugged. But it does not mean that the greater expanse of all that I am is unplugged, because that is never the case. So when this happens, my soul's GPS, it's plugged in. It's recalculating. It's helping me find my way, and soon I will receive the guidance. But the other part of this message talks about lightness of spirit, which is truly one of my core values. It is one of the ways I navigate through life. To me, lightness of spirit really evokes walking through life with a light touch, looking for those sparks of inspiration, those portals of opportunity that might sing to us or whisper to us that say, hey, over here, there's something cool I want you to see. There's a new opportunity. There's a spark of inspiration with your name on it. And this is important because a lot of times when life feels heavy, and to me right now, life feels heavy. Not my personal curriculum. I'm fine in my personal life, but I mean, the collective feels heavy. There can be this intention or desire to kind of fix everything, right? So if this part of my life isn't working so well, what can I do to fix it? What can I do to heal it? And it's not that those aren't ever good approaches. Of course they are. Of course they are, right? But sometimes if we will shift our attention away from that which feels heavy and we focus on what feels light, the lightness of spirit. It allows us to infuse our consciousness and our energy field with higher frequencies that delight us. And so for me, quite often, focusing on lightness of spirit is a great antidote to the lostness or the heaviness. For instance, for me, recording this episode for you evokes a lightness of spirit. I love coming to the blanket fort, and I love broadcasting these ripples of love for you. It makes me happy. So even if there are other things going on in the world and in my life, I can focus right now on this moment with you, and I can feel the love of the angels. Because this broadcast is a co-creation, it is not simply me sending you love, it is an amplified, intentional energy field filled with love from the angels, the beautiful celestial beings who are here supporting you. And they are supporting me too. They're supporting us all. So these moments allow us to plug into a lightness of spirit. It's an elixir that helps us lift our feet up off the earth for a little while and replenish and remember who we are. Because we are not our problems. We are not our troubles. We are divine beings having a human experience, and sometimes we are very, 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 very identified with our humanness. And I think at those moments, it's important to also reconnect with our divinity. It brings in more resourcefulness. So here's to lightness of spirit, my friends. Here is drifting off to a good expanse of sleep with lightness of spirit. And if you're not sure how to cultivate it, just ask the angels, hey, angels. And you can talk to them that informally. Hey, angels. Hey, angels. Please help imbue me with a beautiful lightness of spirit as I rest, so that I may awaken tomorrow feeling that beautiful lightness of spirit as it carries me through the day. And just put whatever is troubling you into a metaphoric basket and hand it over to the angels, and they will pray and infuse it with light on your behalf. We will call in the healing through all dimensions of time in service to your highest and best good. And the angels are already here, and I will call them in though, because I love the ritual of it. So take another deep breath in with me and release. And beautiful angels on high, we are so deeply grateful for your presence here. I ask that you imbue this broadcast with divine love that ripples to all who hear this message. That this ripple moves throughout time and space, creating a wellspring of goodness, of compassion, and of light. Angels, I ask that you help to lift our burdens, clear our fear, help us connect with the lightness of spirit that helps us remember our authentic path. Angels, I ask that you ripple blessings to all the beloveds who hear this message. I am so grateful for the waves of love you bring forward now as we open to receive the light that is here for us. And beautiful beloveds, just breathe and allow your body to relax. The angels are with you. They are filling the room you are in with a soft pink light. This light is healing. It will help you replenish. It is helping you to remember the brightness and the fullness of your authentic self. You, dear one, are a blessing here on earth. Truly you are. And I am so deeply grateful for the opportunity to be here with you now. What a special and precious moment this is as we gather together to pay tribute to you. You are remarkable. You are a gift from on high. You are one of the ways God's love is made visible on this planet. Reverend Michael Beckwith says that, and whenever he does, my whole soul smiles. You are one of the ways God's love is made visible on this planet. We thank God for the gift of you. There's a little taste of agape spiritual center for you. So take a breath in and release and allow yourself to drift off whenever you are ready. And while you do, I'm going to read you a story. And for our story tonight, I really want to return to Anne of Green Gables. I hope you're enjoying this story. I love Anne, and I love sharing her story with you. This is written by Lucy Maud Montgomery, and I love the language, the vocabulary, and the vivacity of Anne that Lucy Maud Montgomery brings to this book. So I'll give you a rambling synopsis. Because it's a sleep podcast, I don't have to be concise. I can ramble, and I have to tell you that makes me so happy that I don't have to worry about making this concise and pithy for you. It could just be rambling. So Anne, our beloved Anne, is an orphan who is adopted by Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert, who are siblings. They're in their 60s, or late 50s, and they own a farm, Green Gables. And they chose to adopt an orphan because they needed help on the farm, and they also knew they could give an orphan a good home. They're very kind people. They thought they were adopting an orphan boy, but there was a mix-up at the orphanage, and they sent Anne. So it's Anne with an E, as Anne would be the first to tell you. Her E is very important to her. Anne is a daydreamer. She is a storyteller. She is fanciful. She is fanciful. And she is full of big dreams. She feels deeply. She is very dramatic. So she's just delightful. And Anne's greatest wish is for a bosom friend, what we might call a best friend. And she finds that in her neighbor, Diana Barry. They are bosom friends, and they walk back and forth to school together, and they name all of the different places around Green Gables with big, vibrant names. And they daydream together and they tell each other stories. And one day Marilla says that Anne can invite Diana over for tea. And she says, and you can have some of the cherry cordial. And so Marilla is out for the afternoon and Diana comes over and Anne mistakenly serves Diana Marilla's currant wine. And Diana gets drunk. And Diana's mother, Mrs. Barry, is not happy. She thinks Anne is a bad influence on Diana, and she says they cannot see each other anymore, that Anne is no good for Diana. And the two girls are despondent. They have a sorrowful parting where they promise to love each other forever, and Anne asks for a lock of Diana's hair. It's very emotional. And I'm laughing because I love how big their emotions are, because I remember feeling that way when I was a kid. My emotions were way too big for my life. And so we pick up the story where Anne is in this imposed separation from Diana, and she's talking to Marilla about it. So Anne says, "It's all over," she informed Marilla. "I shall never have another friend. I'm really worse off than ever before, for I haven't Katie Maurice and Violetta now. And Katie Maurice and Violetta were her imaginary friends that she had before she met the real live Diana. So I haven't Katie Maurice and Violetta now. And even if I had, it wouldn't be the same. Somehow, little dream girls are not satisfying after a real friend. Diana and I had such an affecting farewell down by the spring. It will be sacred in my memory forever. I used the most pathetic language I could think of and said thou and thee. Thou and thee seems so much more romantic than you. Diana gave me a lock of her hair, and I am going to sew it up in a little bag and wear it around my neck all my life. Please see that it is buried with me, for I don't believe I'll live very long." Sorry. I love Anne. Oh, I just feel her little heart here, right? Please see that it is buried with me, for I don't believe I'll live very long. Perhaps when she sees me lying cold and dead before her, Mrs. Barry may feel remorse for what she has done and will let Diana come to my funeral. I love Anne. I don't think there's a... Okay, so this is Marilla, and Marilla is very practical, and she is typically unaffected by Anne's dramatic approach to life. So this is Marilla's response. "I don't think there is much fear of you dying of grief as long as you can talk, Anne," said Marilla unsympathetically. The following Monday, Anne surprised Marilla by coming down from her room with her basket of books on her arm and her hip and her lips primmed up into a line of determination. "I am going back to school," she announced. "That is all there is left in life for me, now that my friend has been ruthlessly torn from me. In school, I can look at her and muse over days departed." And I'll interject, especially if you're just new to this story, Anne left school because a boy, Gilbert Blythe, had made fun of her. And Gilbert has tried to apologize, but Anne is not having it. So Anne has been studying at home all this time. "You'd better muse over your lessons and sums," said Marilla, concealing her delight at this development of the situation. If you're going back to school, I hope we'll hear no more of breaking slates over people's head and such carryings on. Behave yourself and do just what your teacher tells you. I'll try to be a model pupil, agreed Anne dolefully. There won't be much fun in it, I expect. Mr. Phillips said Minnie Andrews was a model pupil, and there isn't a spark of imagination or life in her. She is just dull and poky and never seems to have a good time. But I feel so depressed that perhaps it will come easy to me now. I'm going round by the road. I couldn't bear to go by the birch path all alone. I should weep bitter tears if I did. Anne was welcomed back to school with open arms. Her imagination had been sorely missed in games, her voice in singing, and her dramatic ability in the perusal aloud of books at dinner hour. Ruby Gillis smuggled 3 blue plums over to her during Testament reading. Ella May McPherson gave her an enormous yellow pansy cut from the covers of a floral catalog, a species of desk decoration much prized in Avonlea School. Sophia Sloane offered to teach her a perfectly elegant new pattern of knit lace, so nice for trimming aprons. Katie Bolter gave her a perfume bottle to keep slate water in, and Julia Bell copied carefully on a piece of pale pink paper scalloped on the edges the following effusion. When twilight drops her curtain down and pins it with a star, remember that you have a friend, though she may have wandered far. It's so nice to be appreciated, sighed Anne rapturously to Marilla that night. The girls were not the only scholars who appreciated her. When Anne went to her seat after dinner hour, she had been told by Mr. Phillips to sit with the model, Minnie Andrews. She found on her desk a big, luscious strawberry apple. Anne caught it up all ready to take a bite when she remembered that the only place in Avonlea where strawberry apples grew was in the old Blythe orchard on the other side of the lake of shining waters. Anne dropped the apple as if it were a red-hot coal and ostentatiously wiped her fingers on her handkerchief. The apple lay untouched on her desk until the next morning, when little Timothy Andrews, who swept the school and kindled the fire, annexed it as one of his prerequisites. Charlie Sloane's slate pencil, gorgeously bedizened with stripes, red and yellow paper, costing 2 cents where ordinary pencils cost only 1, which he sent up to her after dinner hour, met with a more favorable reception. Anne was graciously pleased to accept it and rewarded the donor with a smile which exalted that infatuated youth straightway into the 7th heaven of delight, and caused him to make such fearful errors in his dictation that Mr. Phillips kept him after school to rewrite it. But as the Caesar's pageant shorn of Brutus' bust did but of Roman's best son remind her more, so the marked absence of any tribute or recognition from Diana Barry, who was sitting with Gertie Pye, embittered Anne's little triumph. Diana might have just smiled at me once, I think, she mourned to Marilla that night. But the next morning a note, most fearfully and wonderfully twisted and folded, and a small parcel were passed across to Anne. Dear Anne, ran the former. Mother says I'm not to play with you or talk to you even in school. It isn't my fault, and don't be cross at me, because I love you as much as ever. I miss you awfully to tell my secrets to, and I don't like Gertie Pye one bit. I made you one of the new bookmarkers out of red tissue paper. They are awfully fashionable now, and only 3 girls in school know how to make them. When you look at it, remember your true friend, Diana Barry. Anne read the note, kissed the bookmark, and dispatched a prompt reply back to the other side of the school. My own darling Diana, of course I am not cross at you because you have to obey your mother. Our spirits can commune. I shall keep your lovely present forever. Minnie Andrews is a very nice little girl, although she has no imagination. But after having been Diana's bosom friend, I cannot be Minnie's. Please excuse mistakes because my spelling isn't very good yet, although much improved. Improved is spelled with 2 O's. Yours until death us do part, Anne or Cordelia Shirley. P.S. I shall sleep with your letter under my pillow tonight. Marilla pessimistically expected more trouble since Anne had begun to go to school, but none developed. Perhaps Anne caught something of the model spirit from Minnie Andrews. At least she got on very well with Mr. Phillips thenceforth. She flung herself into her studies heart and soul, determined not to be outdone in any class by Gilbert Blythe. The rivalry between them was soon apparent. It was entirely good-natured on Gilbert's side, but it is much to be feared that the same thing cannot be said of Anne, who had certainly an unpraiseworthy tenacity for holding grudges. She was as intense in her hatreds as in her loves. She would not stoop to admit that she meant to rival Gilbert in schoolwork, because that would have been to acknowledge his existence, which Anne persistently ignored. But the rivalry was there, and honors fluctuated between them. Now Gilbert was head of the spelling class. Now Anne, with a toss of her long red braid, spelled him down. One morning Gilbert had all his sums done correctly and had his name written on the blackboard on the roll of honor. The next morning Anne, having wrestled wildly with decimals the entire evening before, would be first. One awful day they were ties, and their names were written up together. It was almost as bad as take notice, and Anne's mortification was as evident as Gilbert's satisfaction. When the written examinations at the end of each month were held, the suspense was terrible. The first month, Gilbert came out 3 marks ahead. The second, Anne beat him by 5. But her triumph was marred by the fact that Gilbert congratulated her heartily before the whole school. It would have been ever so much sweeter to her if he had felt the sting of his defeat. Mr. Phillips might not be a very good teacher, but a pupil so inflexibly determined on learning as Anne could hardly escape making progress under any kind of teacher. By the end of the term, Anne and Gilbert were both promoted into the 5th class and allowed to begin studying the elements of the branches by which Latin, geometry, French, and algebra were meant. In geometry, Anne met her Waterloo. "It's perfectly awful stuff, Marilla," she groaned. "I'm sure I'll never be able to make head or tail of it. There's no scope for imagination in it at all. Mr. Phillips says I'm the worst dunce he ever saw at it. I mean, some of the others are so smart at it, and it's extremely mortifying, Marilla. Even Diana gets along better than I do, but I don't mind being beaten by Diana. Even although we met as strangers, now I still love her with an inextinguishable love. It makes me very sad at times to think about her, but really, Marilla, one can't stay sad very long in such an interesting world, can one?" I love that. One can't stay sad very long in such an interesting world. That's such a great quote. I love that. Okay. So we continue to chapter 18, Anne to the rescue. All things great are wound up with all little things. At first glance, it might not seem that the decision of a certain Canadian premier to include Prince Edward Island in a political tour could have much or anything to do with the fortunes of little Anne Shirley at Green Gables, but it had. It was in January the premier came to address his loyal supporters and such of his non-supporters as chose to be present at the monster mass meeting held in Charlottetown. Most of the Avonlea people were on the premier's side of politics. Hence, on the night of the meeting, nearly all the men and a goodly proportion of the women had gone to town 30 miles away. Mrs. Rachel Lynde had gone too. Mrs. Rachel Lynde was a red-hot politician and couldn't have believed that the political rally could be carried through without her, although she was on the opposite side of politics. So she went to town and took her husband. Thomas would be useful in looking after the horse, and Marilla Cuthbert with her. Marilla had a sneaking interest in politics herself, and as she thought it might be her only chance to see a real live premiere, she promptly took it, leaving Anne and Matthew to keep the house until her return the following day. Hence, while Marilla and Mrs. Rachel were enjoying themselves hugely at the mass meeting, Anne and Matthew had the cheerful kitchen at Green Gables all to themselves. A bright fire was glowing in the old-fashioned Waterloo stove, and blue-white frost crystals were shining on the window panes. Matthew nodded over a farmer's advocate on the sofa, and Anne at the table studied her lessons with grim determination, despite sundry wistful glances at the clock shelf where lay a new book that Jane Andrews had lent her that day. Jane had assured her that it was warranted to produce any number of thrills or words to that effect, and Anne's fingers tingled to reach out for it, but that would mean Gilbert Blythe's triumph on the morrow. Anne turned her back on the clock shelf and tried to imagine it wasn't there. Matthew, did you ever study geometry when you went to school? Well, no, I didn't, said Matthew, coming out of his doze with a start. I wish you had, sighed Anne, because then you'd be able to sympathize with me. You can't sympathize properly if you've never studied it. It is casting a cloud over my whole life. I'm such a dunce at it, Matthew. Well, now, I don't know, said Matthew soothingly. I guess you're all right at anything. Mr. Phillips told me last week in Blair's store at Carmody that you was the smartest scholar in school and was making rapid progress. Rapid progress was his very words. There's them as runs down Teddy Phillips and says he ain't much of a teacher, but I guess he's all right. Matthew would have thought anyone who praised Anne was all right. I'm sure I'd get better with geometry if only he wouldn't change the letters, complained Anne. I learned the proposition off by heart, and then he draws it on the blackboard and puts different letters from what are in the book, and I get all mixed up. I don't think a teacher should take such a mean advantage, do you? We're studying agriculture now, and I've found out at last what makes the roads red. It's a great comfort. I wonder how Marilla and Mrs. Lynde are enjoying themselves. Mrs. Lynde says Canada is going to the dogs the way things are being run in Ottawa, and that it's an awful warning to the electors. She says if women were allowed to vote, we would soon see a blessed change. What way do you vote, Matthew? Conservative, said Matthew promptly. To vote conservative was a part of Matthew's religion. Then I'm a conservative too, said Anne decidedly. I'm glad because some of the boys in school are grits. I guess Mr. Phillips is a grit too, because Prissy Andrews' father is one. And Ruby Gillis says that when a man is courting, he always has to agree with the girl's mother in religion and her father in politics. Is that true, Matthew? Well, now, I don't know, said Matthew. Did you ever go courting, Matthew? Well, now, no, I don't know that I ever did, said Matthew, who had certainly never thought of such a thing in his whole existence. Anne reflected with her chin in her hands. It must be rather interesting, don't you think, Matthew? Ruby Gillis says when she grows up she's going to have ever so many bows on the string and have them all crazy about her. But I think that would be too exciting. I'd rather have just one in his right mind. But Ruby Gillis knows a great deal about such matters because she has so many big sisters, and Mrs. Lynde said the Gillis girls have gone off like hotcakes. Mr. Phillips goes up to see Prissy Andrews nearly every evening. He says it is to help her with her lessons, but Miranda Sloane is studying for Queen's too, and I should think she needed help a lot more than Prissy because she's ever so much stupider. But he never goes to help her in the evenings at all. There are a great many things in this world that I can't understand very well, Matthew. Well now, I don't know as I comprehend them all myself, acknowledged Matthew. Well, I suppose I must finish up my lessons. I won't allow myself to open that new book Jane lent me until I am through. But it is a terrible temptation, Matthew. Even when I turn my back on it, I can see it there just as plain. Jane said she cried herself sick over it. I love a book that makes me cry, but I think I'll carry that book into the sitting room and lock it in the jam closet and give you the key. And you must not give it to me, Matthew, until my lessons are done, not even if I implore you on my bended knees. It's all very well to say resist temptation, but it's ever so much easier to resist it if you can't get the key. And then I shall run down to the cellar and get some russets. Matthew, would you like some russets? Well now, I don't know, but I would, said Matthew, who never ate russets but knew Anne's weakness for them. Just as Anne emerged triumphantly from the cellar with her plate full of russets, came the sound of flying footsteps on the icy boardwalk outside, and the next moment the kitchen door was flung open and in rushed Diana Barry, white-faced and breathless, with a shawl wrapped hastily around her head. Anne promptly let go of her candle and plate in her surprise, and plate, candle, and apples crashed together down the cellar ladder, and were found at the bottom embedded in melted grease the next day by Marilla, who gathered them up and thanked mercy the house hadn't been set on fire. Whatever is the matter, Diana? Cried Anne. Has your mother relented at last? Oh, Anne, do come quick, implored Diana nervously. Minnie May is awful sick. She's got croup. Young Mary Jo says, and Father and Mother are away to town, and there's nobody to go for the doctor. Minnie May is awful bad, and young Mary Jo doesn't know what to do, and oh, Anne, I am so scared. Matthew, without a word, reached out for cap and coat, slipped past Diana, and away into the darkness of the yard. He's gone to harness the sorrel mare to go to Carmody for the doctor, said Anne, who was hurrying on hood and jacket. I know it as well as if he'd said it so. Matthew and I are such kindred spirits I can read his thoughts without words at all. I don't believe he'll find the doctor at Carmody, sobbed Diana. I know that Dr. Blair went to town, and I guess Dr. Spencer would go too. Young Mary Jo never saw anybody with croup, and Mrs. Lynde is away. Oh, Anne. Don't cry, Di, said Anne cheerily. I know exactly what to do for croup. You forget that Mrs. Hammond had twins 3 times. When you look after 3 pairs of twins, you naturally get a lot of experience. They all had croup regularly. Just wait until I get the ipecac bottle. You mayn't have any at your house. Come on now. The two little girls hastened out hand in hand and hurried through Lover's Lane and across the crusted field beyond, for the snow was too deep to go by the shorter woodway. Anne, although sincerely sorry for Minnie May, was far from being insensible to the romance of the situation and to the sweetness of once more sharing that romance with a kindred spirit. The night was clear and frosty, all ebony of shadow and silver of snowy slope. Big stars were shining over the silent fields here and there. The dark pointed firs stood up with snow powdering their branches and the wind whistling through them. Anne thought it was truly delightful to go skimming through all this mystery and loveliness with your bosom friend who had been so long estranged. Minnie May, aged 3, was really very sick. She lay on this kitchen sofa, feverish and restless, while her hoarse breathing could be heard all over the house. Young Mary Jo, a buxom, broad-faced French girl from the Creek, whom Mrs. Barry had engaged to stay with the children during her absence, was helpless and bewildered, quite incapable of thinking what to do, or doing it if she thought of it. Anne went to work with skill and promptness. Minnie May has croup all right. She's pretty bad, but I've seen them worse. First, we must have lots of hot water. I declare, Diana, there isn't more than a cupful in the kettle. There. I filled it up. And Mary Jo, you may put some wood on the stove. I don't want to hurt your feelings, but it seems to me you might have thought of this before if you'd had any imagination. Now I'll undress Minnie May and put her to bed, and you try and find some soft flannel cloths. Diana, I'm going to give her a dose of ipecac first of all. Minnie May did not take kindly to the ipecac, but Anne had not brought up 3 pairs of twins for nothing. Down that ipecac went not only once, but many times during the long and anxious night, when the 2 little girls worked patiently over the suffering Minnie May, and young Mary Jo, honestly anxious to do all she could, kept a roaring fire and heated more water than would have been needed for a hospital of croupy babies. It was 3 o'clock when Matthew came with the doctor, for he had been obliged to go all the way to Spencer Vale for one. But the pressing need for assistance was past. Minnie May was much better and was sleeping soundly. I was awfully near giving up in despair, explained Anne. She got worse and worse until she was sicker than ever the Hammond twins were, even the last pair. I actually thought she was going to choke to death. I gave her every drop of ipecac in that bottle, and when the last dose went down, I said to myself, not to Diana or young Mary Jo, because I didn't want to worry them any more than they were worried. But I had to say it to myself just to relieve my feelings. This is the last lingering hope, and I fear it is a vain one. But in about 3 minutes she coughed up the phlegm and began to get better right away. You must just imagine my relief, doctor, because I can't express it in words. You know there are some things that cannot be expressed in words. Yes, I know, nodded the doctor. He looked at Anne as if he were thinking some things about her that couldn't be expressed in words. Later on, however, he expressed them to Mr. and Mrs. Barry. That little red-headed girl they have over at Cuthbert's is as smart as they make 'em. I'll tell you, she saved that baby's life, for it would have been too late by the time I got there. She seems to have a skill and a presence of mind perfectly wonderful in a child of her age. I never saw anything like the eyes of her when she was explaining the case to me. Anne had gone home in the wonderful white frosted winter morning, heavy-eyed from loss of sleep, but still talking unweariedly to Matthew as they crossed the long white field and walked under the glittering fairy arch of the Lovers' Lane maples. Oh, Matthew, isn't it a wonderful morning? The world looks like something God had just imagined for his own pleasure, doesn't it? Those trees look as if I could blow them away with a breath. Poof! I'm so glad I live in a world where there are white frosts, aren't you? And I am so glad Mrs. Hammond had 3 pairs of twins after all. If she hadn't, I mightn't have known what to do for Minnie May. I am real sorry I was ever cross with Mrs. Hammond for having twins. But oh, Matthew, I'm so sleepy. I can't go to school. I just know I couldn't keep my eyes open and I'd be so stupid. But I hate to stay home for guilt. Some of the others will get ahead of the class and it's so hard to get up again. Although, of course, the harder it is, the more satisfaction you have when you get up, haven't you? Well, now I guess you'll manage all right, said Matthew, looking at Anne's little white face and the dark shadows under her eyes. You just go right to bed and have some good sleep, and I'll do all the chores. Anne accordingly went to bed and slept so long and soundly that it was well on in the white and rosy winter afternoon when she awoke and descended to the kitchen where Marilla, who had arrived home in the meantime, was sitting knitting. Oh, did you see the premier? Exclaimed Anne at once. What did he look like, Marilla? Well, he never got to be a premier on account of his looks, said Marilla. Such a nose as that man had, but he can speak. I was proud of being a conservative. Rachel Lynde, of course, being a liberal, had no use for him. Your dinner is in the oven, Anne, and you can get yourself some blue plum preserve out of the pantry. I guess you're hungry. Matthew has been telling me about last night. I must say it was fortunate that you knew what to do. I wouldn't have had any idea for myself, for I never saw a case of croup. There now, never mind talking till you've had your dinner. I can tell by the look of you that you're just full up with speeches, but they'll keep. Marilla had something to tell Anne, but she did not tell it just then, for she knew if she did, Anne's consequent excitement would lift her clear out of the region of such material matters as appetite or dinner. Not until Anne had finished her saucer of blue plums did Marilla say, Mrs. Barry was here this afternoon, Anne. She wanted to see you, but I wouldn't wake you up. She says you saved Minnie May's life, and she is very sorry she acted as she did in that affair of the currant wine. She says she knows now you didn't mean to set Diana drunk, and she hopes you'll forgive her and be good friends with Diana again. You are to go over this evening, if you'd like, for Diana can't stir outside the door on account of a bad cough she caught last night. Now, Anne Shirley, for pity's sake, don't fly up into the air. The warning seemed not unnecessary, so uplifted and aerial was Anne's expression and attitude as she sprang to her feet, her face irradiated with the flame of her spirit. Oh, Marilla, can I go right now without washing my dishes? I'll wash them when I come back, but I cannot tie myself down to anything so unromantic as dishwashing at this thrilling moment. Yes, yes, run along, said Marilla indulgently. Anne Shirley, are you crazy? Come back this instant and put something on you. I might as well call to the wind. She's gone without a cap or wrap. Look at her tearing through the orchard with her hair streaming. It'll be a mercy if she doesn't catch her death of cold. Anne came dancing home in the purple winter twilight across the snowy places. Afar in the southwest was the great shimmering pearl-like sparkle of an evening star in the sky that was pale golden and ethereal rose over gleaming white spaces and dark glens of spruce. The tinkles of sleigh bells among the snowy hills came like elfin chimes through the frosty air. But their music was not sweeter than the song in Anne's heart and on her lips. You see before you a perfectly happy person, Marilla, she announced. I am perfectly happy. Yes, in spite of my red hair. Just at present, I have a soul above red hair. Mrs. Barry kissed me and cried and said she was so sorry that she could never repay me. I felt fearfully embarrassed, Marilla, but I just said as politely as I could, I have no hard feelings for you, Mrs. Barry. I assure you once and for all that I did not mean to intoxicate Diana, and henceforth I shall cover the past with the mantle of oblivion. I love that. I love Anne. Okay, we'll keep going. That was a pretty dignified way of speaking, wasn't it, Marilla? I felt that I was heaping coals of fire on Mrs. Barry's head, and Diana and I had a lovely afternoon. Diana showed me a new fancy crochet stitch her aunt over at Carmody taught her. Not a soul in Avonlea knows it but us, and we pledged a solemn vow never to reveal it to anyone else. Diana gave me a beautiful card with a wreath of roses and a verse of poetry. If you love me as I love you, nothing but death can part us two. And that is true, Marilla. We are going to ask Mr. Phillips to let us sit together in school again, and Gertie Pye can go with Minnie Andrews. We had an elegant tea. Mrs. Barry had the very best china set out. Marilla, just as if I was real company. I can't tell you what a thrill it gave me. Nobody ever used their best china on my account before, and we had fruitcake and pound cake and doughnuts and 2 kinds of preserves, Marilla. And Mrs. Barry asked me if I took tea and said, Pa, why don't you pass the biscuits to Anne? It must be lovely to be grown up, Marilla, when just being treated as if you were is so nice. Well, I don't know about that, said Marilla, with a brief sigh. Well, anyway, when I am grown up, said Anne decidedly, I am always going to talk to little girls as if they were 2, and I'll never laugh when they use big words. I know from sorrowful experience how that hurts one's feelings. After tea, Diana and I made taffy. Well, the taffy wasn't very good. I suppose because neither Diana nor I had ever made any before. Diana left me to stir it while she buttered the plates, and I forgot and let it burn. And then when we set it out on the platform to cool, the cat walked over one plate, and that had to be thrown away. But the making of it was splendid fun. Then when I came home, Mrs. Barry asked me to come over as often as I could, and Diana stood at the window and threw kisses to me all the way down to Lover's Lane. I assure you, Marilla, that I feel like praying tonight, and I'm going to think out a special brand new prayer in honor of the occasion. Oh, just a big sigh. Isn't that lovely? Oh, our 2 best friends are back together again, our 2 bosom friends. So that is where we will leave off. So for now, the angels and I wish you the sweetest of dreams. Know that you are loved and you are precious in all the world. And if you happen to still be awake and still craving some more companionship, there are many more episodes in the archive, so you can queue up another episode and we can continue with our chat. But in the meanwhile, I wish you a good evening. Thank you.